We're going to shift slightly the discussion from fundamental science to innovation. And the question on the table is whether Europe has the right innovation. This is a different slide that we need to show, whether Europe has the right innovation building blocks in place. And to lead that discussion, I'm going to introduce my colleague, Carlos Härtel. Carlos is the chairman of the Science Business Board, and he will be moderating. Hi, Carlos. He will be leading this discussion, but before he does so, we're going to show, as we did before, very short video messages, again, from the leaders of Science Business Network member organizations. Carlos, it's just a couple of minutes. As soon as we're done with the video, the floor will be directly yours. So we can roll the tape, and then I hand over to you.
At Eureka, we believe Europe should be a world leader in innovation as such, independent of area. As long as an innovative product can be developed between partners in at least 2 countries, then commercialized, contributing to sustainable economic growth and job creation, it should be supported. That's why all our funding programs have a bottom-up approach. We believe business knows best which innovation will find a market. That was the thought behind our foundation back in 1985, and it's still our strategic direction today. At Eureka, we already demonstrate the power of European collaboration on innovation. To name but a few, think about biometric passports and the chip in our identity card. These were developed through Eureka's cluster program. Or let me mention our joint Eurostars program with the EU, running since 2008. Eurostars puts innovative SMEs in the driving seat and leads to success stories such as the digital health assistant Symptoma. During the pandemic, it has become the most used symptom checker worldwide with millions of searches. We believe that Europe can only remain at the forefront of innovation worldwide if we keep collaborating across and beyond our borders and continue mobilizing sufficient national R&D budgets in addition to EU funds. Challenges of today must be addressed through open, international and sustainable innovation. Innovation never happens in a closed box.
Les aides européennes, elles sont très importantes du point de vue de la recherche fondamentale. Elles se développent aussi beaucoup aujourd'hui du point de vue de l'innovation. La Commission européenne a mis en place via l'EIC, le European Innovation Council, de nouveaux dispositifs qui vont aider les startups à aller se financer auprès de la Commission européenne à des niveaux qui sont supérieurs à ce que l'on peut trouver à l'échelle nationale. À la fois en subvention, mais aussi en equity, et ça c'est nouveau, et ça permet à nos startups tout de suite d'accéder à une dimension plus importante et avoir de plus grandes perspectives de développement. Et donc le CNRS les accompagne naturellement vers ces dispositifs de financement. On les aide à structurer leurs projets, à montrer quels sont les bénéfices attendus de cette technologie à l'échelle de l'Union européenne et à l'échelle mondiale bien évidemment parce qu'il faut se projeter au-delà ensuite.
Yeah, thank you again, Marilyn, for the introduction before the videos. Let's move straight into our session that is kind of like following up on a regular theme in conferences around research innovation in Europe, namely that there is great strength in fundamental research. And I think the previous panel had talked about the successes of the ERC, but there seems to be a bit of a, I wouldn't say an issue, but a less obvious success stories around how we turn good research results and the strength and science that we do have ultimately into innovation, which most people, I guess, rightfully would assume are fundamentally services and products that are brought to market by companies, maybe marketed worldwide or just for local applications. But that's something which I think is going to be almost a standing item on any discussion around R&D support, European funding programs, when it's about both research as well as innovation. I'm joined here on this panel discussion by 3 experts, if I may say so, in this domain. I'll start out with Caterina Biscari. Caterina is the director of the ALBA Synchrotron in Barcelona. And while certainly that research instrument is one that supports a lot of fundamental work, these large institutions increasingly are supporting also startups, entrepreneurial spirits, and support, if you will, as R&D functions for companies that may not have the capabilities or the knowledge to go into the details as researchers in these organizations can. So welcome, Caterina. The next one to welcome is Nina Coppola. Nina is Director General and CEO at Business Finland. Business Finland is the Finnish government organization for innovation funding and trade, travel and investment promotion, and certainly is interested in both ends of the spectrum, namely what goes on in research, how can we turn that into innovation and ultimately in business opportunities for the private sector to the benefit of everybody. And then definitely not last but not least, we have Jean-David Malo, who is from the European Commission. He is the Director of the European Innovation Council that follows hopefully in the footsteps of the highly successful ERC program, although its remit is very different. The mission is very different, but it's hopefully something that is as impactful as ERC has been for fundamental research. So welcome, Jean-David. And I'm going to start with you, right? My first question goes straight to you. It is still early days for the EIC, right? I think it's about 1 year of full-fledged operation, but nevertheless, I'm sure the signal it had sent and the way how it's being embedded in the other programs is a driver for change. And I want to start off with just asking you, if you can, like, what to take stock of where we are today and where we have been a few years ago and what the EIC does contribute. Give us a little bit of an overview on that.
Thanks a lot, Carlos, and thanks a lot for the opportunity of this event. No, I mean, you certainly remember that when we launched the idea of the European Innovation Council, it was exactly in order to tackle, as you mentioned it in your introduction, in particular 2 gaps. The first one, which is our remaining difficulty in Europe to move from lab to fab. So we remain leaders in our capacity to generate knowledge. I mean, it was mentioned also in the previous session. We are able to have a great university to attract the best researchers in the world. We have Nobel Prize. We have remarkable publication in top journals, but we remain with a lot of difficulty to transfer, in fact, this knowledge into innovative products, innovative processes that can generate later activities, jobs, companies, growth. So this is the first gap. The second gap is that despite the fact that we remain one of the places in the world which is able to generate in particular deep tech startups, and we have created, for example, 2 years ago, more or less the same number of startups in the US, we have a lot of difficulties to accompany them, in particular in the deep tech area, in their growth. And this is typically illustrated by the number of unicorns that you have in the world at the end of the day. So the role rationale of the EIC was indeed to try to tackle these 2 gaps by providing a one-stop shop approach for our innovators, starting with the emergence of an ID, so in very low TRL. So with the idea to stimulate, in fact, the emergence of new technologies that have the potential for future innovation, up to the growth and the scale up of companies that are deep tech oriented mainly. We had the opportunity and we had the chance, in fact, to test our new ideas that we have launched in full-fledged, as you said, only a few months ago, 10 months ago. But we had the opportunity to test already this at the end of Horizon 2020, in 2019 and 2020. And with already very interesting results that help us, in fact, to shape the first year of Horizon Europe for the EIC. What does it mean concretely? It means that we have been able to test our new approach for our Pathfinder program, for our transition program, and for our accelerator program. We had the opportunity in this context to test the new approach regarding the possibility to directly invest in startup and SMEs that are deep tech oriented. And in the context of the EIC fund, we have already taken decision for more than 140 companies for a budget of more than 630 million euro, which means that this fund became one of the biggest deep tech funds in Europe, and this in only 18 months. We have been able also, and this is very important, to attract other investors. In the first 24 direct equity investment made by this EIC fund, we have been able to attract co-investment by venture capital funds and promotional venture funds of around 400 million euro, meaning that for €1 we have invested, we have been able to attract 2.7 times the EIC fund investments. And this has been illustrated in the context of the impact report that we have published during the first EIC summit last November, where we already mentioned the number of centaurs and unicorns that have benefited in the last year from the support of the EIC. So our objective indeed is very ambitious, as you said yourself. I mean, we are not comparable to the European Research Council for sure, because we have not exactly the same remit, but we have the same level of ambition. I mean, today the ERC is clearly, as mentioned by Jean-Éric Paquet, the Director General of DG Research and Innovation, the Nobel Prize fabric in Europe. And it's recognized worldwide. Our ambition for the EIC in the next decade is to become clearly the investment of choice of our investors and to become the fabric of unicorns from Europe. So this requires, of course, to have a very agile way of working. And we have been one of the first programs, together with the ERC, by the way, which is already operational in the context of Horizon Europe. In this context, we have already selected not less than 164 SMEs in the context of the accelerator, 56 cutting-edge research projects, and 29 projects to take breakthrough technologies from the lab into the real world in the context of the Pathfinder and the transition activities. And we have today, I mean, it was not done on purpose, but it's today that we have announced our work program for 2022 with a number of novelties. And I just would like, because I don't want to monopolize the floor, I just would like to highlight 3 of them. First, the possibility to go beyond 15 million euro of direct investment, because in the pilot phase, in the first year of Horizon Europe, we limit ourselves to 15 million euro. But now we have agreed with member states that in a pilot phase, we will test the possibility to go beyond this. It's absolutely necessary in a number of sectors in order to be able to provide our startup and SMEs with competitive advantage vis-à-vis their main competitor in the world in a number of strategic domains. Second, we are also introducing more support for women-led companies, which is another issue in Europe. And we are contributing to a program that is implemented by our sister program, the European Innovation Ecosystem Program, which is Women Tech EU. So the EIC will financially support, in fact, female entrepreneurs in the very early stage. And third, we are focusing even more in the context of our challenge call, because the EIC is both a bottom-up program, but also a challenge program, so top-down program in areas that are considered strategic for the Union. So we will dedicate in our program in 2022 around €500 million in strategic domain calls in all our schemes, so Pathfinder, Accelerator, Transition, especially for the twin transition, of course, in the digital and green, but also in areas that are considered strategic. And I'm sure that you have heard that yesterday, the EIC is also participating to the implementation of the EU CHIPS Act. So not in 2022, but already in 2023, we will financially contribute, in fact, to this very ambitious objective in the context.
Very good. Yeah, Jean-Luc, thank you very much. That's a great overview and a couple of interesting news that you bring here. Immediately, of course, think of what goes on the member states. I think Germany has with the Sprint agency something it's different, but it's also kind of similar. I'm almost sure other countries, I don't know about Finland, but other countries have similar things, which brings me to Nina. And the question is, on the one hand side, from a regional standpoint, but also from a private sector standpoint, sort of is Horizon, and it's not limited to EIC by no means, right? Just take whatever you think is relevant. Are they putting the right priorities in there? Are we doing the right things to deliver on the ambitions?
Yeah, well, it was a very interesting discourse by Jean-David, so thanks for the news. But I think Horizon actually does exactly what it's supposed to do. It is accelerating the speed of innovation and from research into commercialization, as we were talking. I mean, research is good, but of course in the end, we want also commercialization to happen, and it is going to the important areas where, I mean, saving the world areas of our continent. It's also a critical strategic framework to gain this European sovereignty in industrial, technological, and digital domains, as we just heard. It really feeds into that idea. Even though we want European sovereignty, we of course shouldn't close our eyes from the rest of the world, but we should put forward the European sovereignty in a much stronger fashion. And of course, it also provides us then by catalyzing the scientific results and breakthroughs, which we need in order to succeed in the European twin transition. And I think Europe actually should take the forefront in being the world leader in twin transition. We know the US and the China, they are perhaps in the forefront in the digital revolution, but there could be space for Europe to be actually the leader and show the rest of the world how is twin transition done. The really important aspect is that, as was seen perhaps also in some of those videos, that we need to create and facilitate the cooperation between various European actors. Europe is not a single market by any means, and we see that very much in research and in innovation. We have different languages, different standards, but the Horizon Europe actually enables this cooperation and creation of these networks, which are they are paramount for fostering the Europe going forward. And of course, then it also provides a budget which is far beyond what any of the European member states could do together. And perhaps a couple, well, we heard a lot about, I agree, of course, with what we heard about EIC, but I think it's really important there, what was kind of mentioned already, but that Europe takes a standpoint. We have been very good in creating deep tech companies that have then, and this is especially true for Finland, which are then bought up by the Chinese or the US ones. And of course, capital has to move across borders. It's not that, but we need to have capital in Europe to make these deep tech companies transition into unicorns, as was said. And this is facilitated by EIC, and now perhaps even better with these new dimensions that were meant. And it also here we talk about capital that is not available for at least not for the smaller participants in the European Union, because one of the reasons many companies are bought out of Finland is that the capital market in Finland is not high enough. Even though in Finland we last year and in several years in a row we've received the capital has been highest in Europe per capita or per GDP. So we have been very successful in raising capital, but then when we talk about those bigger things, typically the look outside of European borders. The one thing to keep in mind, though, when we talk about this European tool, we need to keep things simple because we talk to companies. So we need to speak the language of the companies and not of the bureaucrats. The reason why the previous SME tool was so popular was that it was the first EU funding instrument that the SMEs were able to understand. So we need to keep an eye open for that. Of course, they have to be governed and they have to be well prepared, but the simplicity is really beautiful. And especially when we talk to SMEs or even startups, that's very important. Another thing that is important is the transparency that the schedules, the timelines, the criteria are as transparent as possible, and that it is open to the companies that how are these tools being used and what are the criteria that they are being applied when we put these in place. And perhaps the one warning voice, this is all very good and EIC should be there, but we also have to think about what it happens when public money comes in and competes or add on to the private money. That doesn't say that we shouldn't have EIC, but we of course, and what we heard that €1 created or accelerated almost 3 private euros. That's what we want to see, obviously. So we don't want the public money to displace or replace the private money, but we want it to accelerate. And it looks like it's working out well. And then perhaps my last point here is that money isn't the solution to everybody. We of course need to have the sense of urgency, and we need to have the funders and everybody working. They want to commercialize, and they need to do that quick. We need to be quick to market, and we don't want the entrepreneurs to relax and lose focus. So perhaps that's my point.
Very good, Nina. I think the plea for simplicity, I can subscribe to that. I think probably everybody can, and strings attached are necessary, but at the same time, of course, especially young companies, entrepreneurs would shy away from things that look too complicated to them. So they may not use opportunities that otherwise would be there, which actually brings me to Caterina quite naturally, because you are sitting at the front end of the whole innovation story. Not all of what fundamental research does leads to innovation. It doesn't have to, but in many cases, there's such unique insights that lend themselves to being commercialized, developed into products, provide real solutions to all kinds of challenges that we are facing. So from your standpoint, coming from that angle, right, what is it that you would like to see? Are the funding mechanisms and the way how things are administered and the way how things are further, is that appropriate, or do you think a few things need to change to unleash the full power?
First of all, thanks for the invitation and for giving me the opportunity of being here. And I will answer as the voice not only of ALBA, which is the Synchrotron research infrastructure, but also of the more extended network of other research infrastructure as LIPS or even ARIE, which includes research infrastructures which are analytical tools for the research. And the interaction between our RIs and the industry is twofold. One is the interaction with the industry, which brings us the technology for our development, which is very important. Also considering that, for example, in Synchrotron, we are now moving from one generation to the other, developing several technologies in many fields. And then, of course, we are tools for the research in the industry, where they come as users to our research infrastructures. So what we would like, I mean, Horizon Europe has just started, and there are several programs which are very interesting for us. But let me just simplify what we think would be more priority. I would say 4 points, all of them important. First of all, as I said before, we need the tools for increasing the competitiveness of the European industry for science, the one which is developing technologies for research infrastructures, which is not only accelerator, optics, detectors, which is what we use in Synchrotron, but also means data handling, digitalization, automatization. This is an industry which is in the other regions of the world is very competitive, and if the European Commission provides programs where all the national facilities can work together, it would be much more productive than what is usually done, which is the funding for each facility given just by their funding agencies, and working therefore more at a national level. Having the European umbrella would make the whole project much more productive. Then, of course, we need also people. We need bridges of which put together the research, and the industrial world. And here, programs for training, for mobility, for showing to the researchers which are the possibilities for innovation, for showing to the people from industry which are the needs of the research, to put together, to have, for example, training programs of people who could work for some time in a research institution and then move to industry. But this would make both worlds speak together more and be also more advanced in the innovation and also in the research. Then, of course, there are already some pilot projects which are very useful. The fact of having transnational access for SMEs directly funded by the European Commission. And this gives to the SMEs the possibility to use our analytical tools to go beyond the wall they see somehow between their small industries with the big research infrastructure. And this is something that should be developed more. And finally, I would say that one of the most important part is it was also mentioned during today several times, the fact that we need to target the challenge of our society, and here to have development of what is already going on in some of the Horizon Europe calls of calls done on a specific challenge. And these programs should put together the research infrastructures and the industry, as it has been done with some programs, but with a higher volume. We are now at LIPS preparing the strategy for the next decade, in which one of our important things is that we are providing targeted challenge-driven access to users from the academic and from the industrial world. And this, under the umbrella of the European Commission, can really give the instrument for solving some of the challenges. And it's no need to repeat which are the challenges, the climate neutral technology, the health problems like antibiotic resistance. I mean, there are some, we all know which are these challenges, but the important thing is that we want to create tools for specific challenge solving, where all the communities from the academy to the industry can provide solutions. Of course, we in the research infrastructure are in the TRL, in the low TRL part, but if we don't start from the low TRL part, you never get to the high TRL part. So this is more or less what we are asking to the Horizon Europe.
Thank you, Caterina. Now, for the remaining 5 minutes we've got, I would like to make a quick tour and look beyond Europe, since I mean the Union has a large number of member states, so not surprising that the Union is often very busy just with itself, but other things go on around the world. And I'll start with looking at the US, and so may tie you in, Jean-David here, but look at the Build Back Better Act or the Infrastructure Act. There's quite some provisions in there for a lot of funding, especially in the green tech space. How do you think are we comparing, right? I mean, can others just move faster? It takes too long for us to get things together. What's your assessment today of how Europe does compared to the other globally rivaling regions, if I may say so?
You want me to start?
Yeah, please, Joe. Yeah, I have another question for you. So a quick answer to that one.
No, very quickly. I think we have in Europe, we have all the assets to compete. I mean, we have the talents, we have the innovators, we have the entrepreneurs, we have the ideas. The challenge we have is to work all together. We have not a federal budget like the US. I mean, it's a single country. So we have 27 member states. We have the chance to have some community tools, and the framework program is one of them, but we have a number of others. I think that in this context, what happened with the Next Generation EU initiative is something that is going in the right direction, with something which is very ambitious, but with a global approach where all the member states in reality are sharing the risk altogether, but focusing on the needs of each member states, but with a common approach. So it's required, of course, that each member states are focusing in the same direction. But when I see what is taking place in a number of domains, I mean, I was mentioning a few minutes ago the CHIPS Act. When I see what is taking place regarding some of the green transition, and when you look at the plans that has been presented by the member states in the context of the Recovery and Resilience Fund, I mean, I am relatively optimistic that indeed we can compete with what is taking place in the US, but not only in the US, by the way.
Thank you. Thank you, Jean-David. A quick question to Nina, since you mentioned a small country and not big capital markets, but Israel is a very small country. It doesn't have huge capital markets either. How do you see that, right? Is that a role that smaller countries in the European Union could play, or does it just not work for the continent as a whole?
I mean, in Israel, I think the percentage they put of the GDP they put on R&D and I is 8%. And I think in Europe, we are at average. I think Finland is at the average. We are 2.7. Having said that, 2.7 out of Finland's money is not as 2.7 out of, say, Germany's or France's money. So I do think everybody has, of course, to. It's about the willingness and the decisiveness to act. And here I do believe that the union has an important role. As I said, and Jean-David as well, we are not a single market, and we don't have a federal budget. So every country has, of course, to act on their own, and there has to be the political willingness to invest into R&D. But then we also need to work together, because not a single country alone, I don't think that will make the summer, as we say in Finland, will not be sufficient. We do need the European Union or unified European effort is perhaps the better way of putting that. But there, the European Union is the accelerator or the networker that helps us do that.
Thank you, Nina. And the last question goes to Caterina here, namely, what do you see globally as best practices in connecting research infrastructures to innovation, to industry, to drive things? Is Europe leading the way, or do you see other regions that cannot do it better?
I wouldn't say that Europe is leading the way. I mean, if we look at Europe, of course, there are countries like Germany, for example, where you see that, you see the Fraunhofer institutes, and that is, but if we compare as a whole, as continent to the United States or to China, we are not leading, but we have possibility of improving, and I think here the role of the union is essential, because we have to work together. I mean, inside between the researchers in Europe are working together, and they really go together in the progress of the science. But when you speak of industry, of course, the industry is much more, the interest is for each country, for its own industry, is much more national. And this may be the problem to make the European industry as a whole to work together as we do in the part of the public research.
Thank you very much, Caterina. I think this brings us to the end of the session, if I'm not mistaken. And I would at that point thank all the participants here, Nina, Caterina, and Jean-David, very much for your insights. And with that, I hand back over to the studio.
Thank you, Carlos, and thank you to Caterina, Jean-David, and Nina for a very insightful set of discussions.